In a previous lesson, I covered some of the newly independent states in Africa. Here, I will cover a few more African states, with an emphasis on some of the difficulties they have faced. As we saw previously, many of the newly independent post-colonial African states were initially democratic, but frequently fell into dictatorships within a generation. Part of the blame for this has to lie with the colonial powers that did little to prepare their colonies for self-government. Ethnic rivalries that resulted from the poorly planned maps of the colonial powers and were then replicated in the independent countries also frequently led to violence in a struggle for power. All too often, these struggles led to military intervention and the rise of military dictatorships. One of the African states that began its independence with serious ethnic conflicts was Nigeria. Nigeria had three major ethnic groupings. The first were the House of Fulani, who lived in the north and were majority Muslim. In the western region were the Yoruba, who had a history of being ruled over by Yoruba kings. They were mostly animist in religion and made their living off of farming. The first capital of Nigeria was Lagos, which was located in the Yoruba region. Lastly were the Igbo, who lived in the eastern region. The Igbo were historically Christian and also allowed more democracy in their governmental organization. When Nigeria gained its independence in 1960, a federal system was adopted under which these three regions were granted self-rule, but also shared power together in the national government. This federal system would struggle to keep Nigeria united. The first conflict erupted in 1963 when the non-Yoruba people in the western region tried to gain autonomy as a fourth region. Fearing the loss of power and dissolution of the state, in January 1966, some Igbo army officers from the eastern region seized control of the capital, declared martial law, and abolished the constitutional federal system. This prompted the House of Fulani in the north to launch an attack against the Igbo. The Igbo were driven back east into their original region. In 1967, then, the Igbo declared their eastern region to be an independent state known as Biafra. The other two regions refused to concede this independence and began a war of reunion that would last for 3 years. Ultimately, the badly outnumbered and outgunned Igbo were defeated and Biafra was reabsorbed into Nigeria. Over 1 million Igbo died in the struggle, many from starvation, as a result of the policies of the Nigerian army. Despite their defeat, the Igbo were not punished after the war, but rather given federal money to help rebuild. The military, though, did retain power, and from 1970 until 1979, Nigeria was a military dictatorship. The national government within the federal system was greatly strengthened, and the economy grew as Nigeria benefited from rich oil deposits. In 1979, Nigerian democracy was restored, but ethnic divisions caused so many difficulties that in 1983 the military again took charge, claiming civilian corruption. This period of military rule was dominated by the House of Fulani in the north. In 1993, elections were held again, but the results were declared invalid, and the winner, Moshood Abiola, pictured at the top right, did not assume power. Instead, General Sani Abacha, just to the right here in a military uniform, took control for 5 years. Abacha banned all political activities and jailed dissidents without trial. In 1998, General Adesalami Abubakar, who's dressed in white to the right, succeeded Abacha, ended military rule, and began the process of restoring democracy to Nigeria. The victor in these elections was the Yoruba politician Olusegun Obasanjo. He had been a critic of the military regime and jailed for his efforts. As a former general, though, he was trusted by the military. He spent his 8 years in power battling corruption and seeking the cancellation of the $30 billion debt that Nigeria had accrued since independence. Another African state with an embattled post-independence history is South Africa. South Africa began its colonial history as a racially divided state run by the Dutch and then British that maintained the rule of the small white minority over the black African majority. In 1910, South Africa had become a self-ruling dominion, and in 1931, an independent member of the British Commonwealth. Although technically a constitutional government, South Africa denied rights to the majority of its population. This discrimination became law in 1948, when the National Party took power and implemented a policy known as apartheid. This created a complete separation of the races in the state and prevented any kind of social contract. Each of the races had its own schools, hospitals, and neighborhoods. This was expanded upon in 1959 with the creation of preserves, or homelands. Here, black South Africans were forbidden from white areas unless they were servants or laborers. When the maps of these preserves was drawn, black South Africans, although 75% of the population, were granted only 13% of the land. In 1912, shortly after the granting of Dominion status, the African National Congress, or ANC, was formed. This is a black South African organization whose role was to organize boycotts and strikes to resist the racist policies of South Africa. The ANC was quickly banned by the South African government, and its leaders, including Nelson Mandela, were arrested. In 1976, there were riots in Soweto over racist school policies. The police responded with force, killing 600 students. The next year, the activist protester Stephen Biko, pictured here, was beaten to death in police custody. Unrest continued to grow, forcing the government to declare a nationwide emergency in 1986. One of the key leaders in the anti-apartheid campaign was the Christian minister Desmond Tutu. He's pictured on top here. Tutu encouraged foreign nations to oppose apartheid by stopping trade with South Africa. Many states responded by stopping their trade, and South Africa was also banned from the Olympics. For his efforts, Tutu won the Nobel Peace Prize in 1984. In 1989, F.W. de Klerk, pictured below, became the leader of South Africa. Recognizing the increasing unrest in the state, combined with foreign pressure, de Klerk determined to transform South Africa to end its isolation by repealing apartheid. To this end, in February 1990, he legalized the ANC and released its surviving leaders from prison. Over the next 18 months, further elements of apartheid were repealed, and the various restrictions that foreign countries had imposed were eased. In April 1994, the first South African elections in which all races could vote were held. In this 1994 election, de Klerk ran for re-election against the candidate nominated by the ANC, Nelson Mandela, pictured here on top. Despite fears about possible unrest, the elections went smoothly, and the ANC won a resounding 63% of the vote. In addition to winning the presidency for Mandela, 252 of the 400 seats in the National Assembly were won for the ANC. Mandela would serve as president for the next 5 years and oversee the drafting of the new Constitution of 1996. This document was modeled off of the U.S. Constitution and guaranteed democratic government and equal rights for all citizens. In 1999, Mandela was succeeded by the next ANC president, Thabo Mbeki, who would govern until 2008. After the joy of expanding civil rights under Mandela, South Africa now had to integrate and address some of its problems and weaknesses. The South African economy was weak under Mbeki's presidency, but he tried to remedy this through expanding free market solutions. Still, the unemployment rate remained astronomically high at 40%, and a majority of South Africans, 60% of them, lived below the poverty rate. The crime rate continued to rise, a problem South Africa struggled with for many years. South Africa was also confronted with the AIDS epidemic. South Africa has the largest HIV outbreak in the world, with over 20% of its population testing positive.